This video does an analysis of an essay that's one of our readings, and the point of an analysis is to break things down to its parts and then sort of evaluate those parts for their effectiveness as an argument. Now, what we're looking at today is Ban the Things, Ban Them All by Molly Ivins. Now, Molly wrote this in March of 1993 in Austin, Texas. And when you first see just the title, that's a good place to start with an analysis. We have something that she wants to ban, but she has not specified what it is just yet. But what's significant about this title is she repeats herself, ban the things. She doesn't even say what the things are, ban the things. And then she says, ban them all. This repetition where she's banning the same thing, only each time it's a little harder, indicates that there's a passionate feeling behind this. This reads like somebody who has just had it up to here with whatever these things are and just wants to get rid of them. So you can notice that in the wording. There is no mistake in titles. When somebody repeats most of the title or essentially the entire title in different words, it's very emphatic. Now, we go to her first paragraph. Her first real paragraph is guns, period, everywhere guns. See how that echoes the title? Because the title was ban, and this is guns and guns. And again, that repetition, that adding that word everywhere, not just ban them, but ban them all. Guns, everywhere guns. It's again very emphatic and very emotional. So she starts by saying, let me start this discussion by pointing out that I am not anti-gun, I'm pro-knife. Consider the merits of the knife. And in the next paragraph she says, in the first place, you have to catch up with someone to stab him. A general substitution of knives for guns would promote physical fitness. We'd turn into a whole nation of great runners. Plus, knives don't ricochet and people are seldom killed while cleaning their knives. Now, if you look at this, it might seem totally absurd. Why on earth would somebody think, all right, look, I'm not against guns, but I really think knives are a better way to kill people. The reason that it's pointed out here is that you have to catch up with somebody. You know, people can outrun a gun. I'm sorry, people can outrun a knife. They can't outrun a gun. Knives don't ricochet. There are no innocent bystanders when it comes to knives, right? This on the face of it, as I say, looks very absurd. However, she is actually responding to something that if you did a little research, and it would help you to know this, in 1993, it was not all unusual for gun proponents to say, well, if somebody wants to kill someone, they don't need a gun, they'll just take a knife and go kill them. And what she's doing here is she's pointing out the absurdity of this argument. Of course you can kill people with just about anything. I just read about a woman who was killed by being hit by a wooden cutting board. To me, that's just absurd in and of itself. But the fact is, she wants to point out, look, if somebody wants to kill someone, they will, but a gun makes it so much easier. You can stand on a street corner and just shoot down the street, pop, 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 and a bunch of people are dead. Try throwing a knife and see how many people you hit. This is her point. Now, in this next paragraph, she says, as a civil libertarian. Now, think about a civil libertarian. It means somebody who believes in civil liberties. Those are liberties that are granted to all of us. I, of course, support the Second Amendment, and I believe it means exactly what it says. And she quotes, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And then she says, 14-year-old boys are not part of a well-regulated militia. Members of wacky religious cults are not part of a well-regulated militia. Permitting unregulated citizens to have guns is destroying the security of this free state. Now again, she does a really smart thing here in that she brings back the entire text of the Second Amendment. It's not as long as the First Amendment by far. It simply says this. Now, it helps to know that the NRA building in Washington has a plaque on it that has the Second Amendment, but it only has the second part. The plaque reads, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, as if that were the entire amendment. But you'll notice what goes before is a because, right? The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and the implication is because a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. So this is a qualification to this, and she's pointing this out, and she's saying it's not just that everybody should have guns. They should be part of a, as she puts it, a well-regulated militia. And this is something that is a very smart approach to arguing this point, is to bring in the entire amendment. Then she says, I am intrigued by the arguments of those who claim to follow the judicial doctrine of original intent. Now, if you don't know what that is, you'd need to look that up. But what it basically means is, well, this is what the founders meant when they said this. And she says, how do they know it was the dearest wish of Thomas Jefferson's heart that teenage drug dealers should cruise the cities of this nation, perforating their fellow citizens with assault rifles? Channeling? In other words, do they talk to the dead Thomas Jefferson and ask him, what did you mean when you said that? This is something of an emotional response to this, obviously. And yet she is saying that there is no way of actually knowing what the original intent of the amendment is, so we should stick pretty much with the words as we understand them. She says there's more hooey spread about the Second Amendment. It says quite clearly that guns are for those who form a part of a well-regulated militia, that is, the armed forces, including the National Guard. The reasons for keeping them away from everyone else get clearer by the day. Here she is trying to say that unless you recognize that the way that we understand a well-regulated militia today is some military force, then you are spreading hooey about the Second Amendment. This is, of course, debatable, but this is how her argument goes. Now, she says the comparison most often used is that of the automobile, another lethal object that is regularly used to wreak great carnage. Obviously, this society is full of people who haven't got enough common sense to use an automobile properly, but we haven't outlawed cars yet. Again, what she's doing here is she is echoing an argument that was common during the time in order to keep guns completely unregulated. Along with the idea that you could use a knife to kill somebody, they would often say, well, you know, you don't want to, if somebody wanted to kill someone with a knife, they could do that. You don't want to ban knives, do you? Then they say, and automobiles kill thousands of people every year. You don't want to ban those, do you? And she says, we do, however, license them and their owners, restrict their use to presumably sane and sober adults, and keep track of who sells them to whom. At a minimum, we should do the same with guns. Now, this is where she takes, again, a common argument and shows the absurdity of it. The idea that cars somehow relate to guns it's a bit of a stretch, frankly. As again, a lot of people are also electrocuted every year, and nobody's even thinking that we should ban electricity. But she does suggest licensing them and restricting their use to sane and sober adults, which is, if you'll recall, one of the very important things in the whole gun controversy currently going on. And that is that sometimes people they manage to get guns even when they perhaps should not, based on their mental health track record. Not to mention the fact that we don't always keep track of who sells guns to whom in gun shows. This is a loophole. So she's pointing these problems out. Remember, this is 1993, so licensing was quite a bit different then than now. In truth, she says, there is no rational argument for guns in this society. This is no longer a frontier nation in which people hunt their own food. It is a crowded, overwhelmingly urban country in which letting people have access to guns is a continuing disaster. Those who want guns, whether for target shooting, hunting, or potting rattlesnakes, get a hoe, should be subject to the same restrictions placed on gun owners in England, a nation in which liberty has survived nicely without an armed populace. Now, this would mean that you might want to see what the restrictions were placed on gun owners in England in 1993, and maybe even now. But basically, the argument here is that was then, this is now. That was an agrarian society, and maybe there was a rational argument for letting everybody have guns at that time, even though by Constitution they should have only been well-regulated militia people. The argument that guns don't kill people is patent nonsense. Anyone who has ever worked in a cop shop knows how many family arguments end in murder because there was a gun in the house. Did the gun kill someone? No. But if there'd been no gun, no one would have died. At least not without a good foot race first. Guns do kill, unlike cars. That is all they do. And again, she's recalling a very common argument that guns don't kill people. People do. And she's saying, yes, people do kill, and they're more likely to do so when they have guns. And this is something that is a common response to that argument. It says Michael Crichton makes an interesting argument about technology in his thriller Jurassic Park, which was pretty new at the time. He points out that power without discipline is making this society into a wreckage. By the time someone who studies the martial arts becomes a master, literally able to kill with bare hands, that person has also undergone years of training and discipline. But any fool can pick up a gun and kill with it. Here she seems to be suggesting that, yes, there are certain opportunities in which people learn the ways to kill, but at the same time they learn how not to kill. She uses martial arts masters here. You could just as easily talk about military people or police training. There are ways that you're trained perhaps to know when not to use the gun, and that doesn't happen when you buy your gun completely legally and without any record at a gun show. A well-regulated militia surely implies both long training and long discipline. That is the least, the very least, that should be required of those who are permitted to have guns, because the gun is literally the power to kill. For years, I used to enjoy taunting my gun nut friends about their psychosexual hang-ups. Always in a spirit of good cheer, you understand. But letting the noisy minority in the National Rifle Association force us to allow this carnage to continue is just plain insane. Now, there's a lot that goes on in this paragraph. She recalls earlier with the idea that there is discipline involved in a well-regulated militia. That goes back again to the martial arts master. She says that she believes her gun nut friends, as she says, might have psychosexual hang-ups. In other words, the gun is a way of compensating for some perceived or understood shortcoming, if you will, in the term of her gun nut friends. Now, this is a problematic paragraph because it does a lot of things here, and one of the worst things it does is call names, attack the people instead of their arguments. She chose to call her friends gun nuts. She chose to suggest that there were psychosexual hang-ups. They had some kind of mental illness. And this is not relevant to the argument at all. So this is what we call an ad hominem, which means literally in Latin, to the man. It's an ad hominem fallacy. She is attacking the person and not their logic. And that is not something we do. She says right up front, I do think gun nuts have a power hang-up. I don't know what's missing in their psyches that they need to feel they have the power to kill. But no sane society would allow this to continue. Again, ad hominem attack. This is invalid as a form of argument. And she ends on, ban the damn things. Ban them all. You want protection? Get a dog. Now, if we look at all of this, we see her repetition of things recalled again here. This time she added the thing, damn things, instead of just ban the things. And this brings us to what, we have strengths and we have weaknesses here. One of the strengths is that she reproduces the entire text of the Second Amendment. That is something we all agree is one of the reasons that guns are allowed in the first place. It is a very good thing that we are able to refer to a text that we all agree is a significant text. Also, she uses the opposition's arguments against them by highlighting their absurdity. And early on especially, she does that quite well. When someone tries to compare it to knives, guns to knives, or to cars, she points out that is absurd. The weakness, it's a little inconsistent. And when she talks about we at least license the cars, we at least train people, she's calling for banning, but she's arguing, well, at least we should license them. That's a little inconsistent, and I would like to see her address that a little bit. And she uses the ad hominem logical fallacy, which is attacking the person and not the argument the person is making. So all in all, I have had students read this article and they are gun proponents and they become livid and they say things like, well, she's talking about knives. That doesn't have anything to do with guns. They're right. It doesn't. But it would help them to pay attention to when she says this is a common argument. You know, actually, she says that about cars, but you may need to do a little research to 1993 to find out what people were saying at that time about guns. The other thing students, particularly in Illinois, like to do is point out, well, we do have licensing. You have to go through quite a bit to get a gun. And that is true now. It was not the case in 1993, I guarantee it. So when you're wanting to argue with this particular argument, when you want to argue with the author of this essay, there are things you can go after. You can go after her interpretation of the Second Amendment, absolutely. You can get her for ad hominem attacks, absolutely. And maybe the over-the-top emotionalism is a red flag that she isn't being logical, but rather reacting from her gut. All of those things are things that you might be able to find weakness with this essay. However, saying that, well, we do license them, she's got that wrong, is an anachronistic sort of criticism. So it's invalid in and of itself. So I hope this helps as a way of reading this text and finding out what is there, or in other words, analyzing it.